Well, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and start right at 11 o'clock. I would like to welcome you to the, let me just switch here. To today's session for annual financial report presented by Local Government Services Bureau. We're having three presenters today. Carrie's going to start us out, and then Tammy, and then Darla will finish up the presentation. So a couple of reminders, just please mute yourself if you are not muted. It will be picked up, and this is being recorded. So it can be viewed at sort of whatever is convenient for you. Do you want to remind you that next week we do have another webinar? This one is a presentation by Angela Simpson, talking about human resources. And I will send out that link tomorrow. I didn't want to inundate everybody with two links. So the reminder will come out tomorrow for next week's webinar, which will be Thursday at 7 a.m. So I am going to turn it over to Carrie and mute myself.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And I just, like Jane says, I just want to welcome everybody. And as she indicated, both Tammy and Darla are going to be presenting with me today. We hope you're going to learn how an important piece the AFR is to your job, what the components of the AFR consist of, what MCAs and GASB statements are going to influence your AFR, as well as learning how to complete one in our Excel template. This is a pretty lengthy document, so we're kind of doing an accelerated version of this training today. So we'll just get right on into it and just keep going here. The AFR is a report prepared annually. It tells the financial story of your entity. It's required by statute. Sorry, trying to clear some screens here. Required by statutes, it's influenced by GASB statements, and it's prepared according to GAAP, unless you're using a modified version of GAAP for the Small Government Financial Reporting Framework. There's three components to the AFR. The filing fee form, and that determines your filing fee and if you need an audit. The AFR itself, just a series of financial statements, notes to your financial statements and other information. And then the database ledger log, which is either an Excel or a CSV file that is used to upload your financial information to the governor's transparency site. All three pieces are required for your submission and prior to our acceptance of your report. Many of these are missing. We are going to call you and let you know, and we cannot be putting you into an accepted status, and we'll move it back into return to client so you're able to upload the correct documents. As we go through this today, we're going to be giving some hints and tips on how to get a very good, complete AFR package submitted, and you'll start your AFR after your year-end process is completed. You'll want to run a trial balance before and after completing your year-end close. This allows you to check your balances to make sure make sure that they're correct. Your AFR can be prepared and submitted before your audit if you're going to have one. And this, getting it done before also will help your auditors in getting their process started as well. If you need assistance on the year-end close, we have done a webinar last month, and it's available at the LGC website on year-end close. And of course, we're always available to answer questions. And this is a task that should be done by entity staff. And by doing this, you're going to gain an understanding of the financial reporting process. And again, your financials will be ready for your auditors. So the due date on the AFR is within 6 months of your fiscal year end, or December 31st if you have a June 30 fiscal year end. If it's not submitted by the due date, late fees start accruing the first week of January. And then new this year, we have the Small Government Financial Reporting Framework. This is a version that you can use if you apply and are accepted. And Darla is going to talk about this towards the end of the presentation. The database ledger load and the filing fee form, again, are required as part of your submission. And if you use our Excel version, the database ledger load's embedded into that workbook. And the filing fee is also included in that, and filing fee forms included, and that will auto-calculate as you complete your statements. And again, we're going to have more on these as we go through the presentation. So your AFR is uploaded to our portal and the Governor's Transparency website. The PDF version you submit is what the public views entering through our portal. And the DLL is what feeds into the Governor's Transparency website. The AFR is different from your audit in that the AFR is going to include other supplementary information as well as additional reports. And again, having your AFR done is a good starting point for your auditors. And then before I move on here, just one little piece of trivia to share with you is we review over 1,000 AFRs annually. We have AFRs for the counties, cities, towns, and special purpose districts that we look at. And the majority of these are all due on December 31st. So our January is quite busy. And the school districts are actually looked at and reviewed by OPI. There's 2 MCAs that affect your reporting. The first is 2-7-503, which indicates that the governing body will ensure a financial reports made every year in a format determined by Local Government Services Bureau and submitted within 6 months of your fiscal year end. And then 2-7-517 describes penalties and fines for failing to submit a report. And this includes publication in your local paper with your name and saying that you did not submit your report, and could also involve penalties that may include the withholding of state financial assistance. This is an area that meeting the deadline is an area that your auditors check and report on, as well as DNRC and Department of Commerce will check with us too to make sure your reporting is current. And just a little heads up to let you know that you're going to have a delay in submitting your report. You might want to give us a call and let us know. So there's a couple acceptable versions of the AFR that we will take. The first I'm going to talk about here is the AFR in Excel, and this is the template on our website. It includes all the statements and information and documents you'll need to complete an AFR. The DLL, again, is embedded in this template, so you don't have to create a standalone version. And the filing fee forms also included here in Auto Calculates. And during the presentation today, we're going to focus on completing this AFR in Excel template. The other format for the Small Government Financial Reporting Framework is also found on our website. This is a modified GAAP approach to reporting. And again, you have to apply and have acceptance in order to use this format. And both of these formats are submitted in PDF and Excel versions. So another acceptable version is the audit in lieu of the AFR. And this is essentially your audit report along with some other required documents. And those will include combining statements, the cash reconciliation, cash receipts and disbursements for all funds for the entire year, schedule of intergovernmental revenues, the general information page, your filing fee form, the DLL. We have a template on our website that includes the schedule of what's required and samples on how to put it together. And the other note I want to make here as well is that if you're going to submit this version, you need to make sure it's submitted by the deadline to avoid penalties. So in the last version, we will accept is our a combination of financial statements and software generated reports. And also don't forget with this version too, the filing fee form and the database ledger load are also required. And this version is usually a set of financial statements or your basic financial statements that are prepared possibly outside your software, and then software statements for your non-major funds and other required reports. And here also we have a checklist on our website, and that checklist also includes some references to the Black Mountain software statements. So I'm going to give some terms and definitions here. We tend to use the same report names and stuff, and these all become part of our daily language here. So the AFR, or the annual financial report, is a summary of your entity's financial status as of a specific date required by MCA. Your audit report, or CAFR, is a financial report that's been reviewed by an independent auditor and an opinion's been rendered regarding the content of your report there. Management discussion and analysis, or MD&A, per GASB 34 is an objective and easily readable analysis of the financial performance for the year for your entity. And the notes, which are also part of your basic financial statements, just provide additional information for amounts reported in the financials. Excuse me. The letter of transmittal is what it sounds like, a letter that transmits or sends your financial report or statements to your users. GAFR has identified 4 basic elements to the letter of transmittal. There is some additional information they've suggested to use for the first 3 elements here. I don't have it listed, but I do have it available in a document I can share with you. So just let me know if you'd like me to send that on for you when you're creating a letter and need that extra information. So your basic financial statements per GASB 34 are the government-wide statements, your fund financial statements, and your notes to your financial statements. The government-wide statements include a statement of net position and a statement of activities. They are prepared on the economic resource measurement focus and use the accrual basis of accounting. They're going to report all of the assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses, expenditures, and gains or losses for your government. We do not include the fiduciary fund statements with your government wides. The fund financial statements provide the information on your major governmental and enterprise funds, including blended component units. And here is where you're going to complete your fiduciary fund statements when you complete your fund financials. The governmental funds statements are prepared using current financial resources and modified accrual, while your enterprise and fiduciary funds are prepared using economic resource and full accrual basis of accounting. The notes to the financials, again, provide that additional and essential information for the user's understanding of amounts reported. And just kind of a basic definition here for kind of a reminder from Accounting 101, that your balance sheet reports assets, liabilities, and fund balance for an entity as of a specific date. And the operating statements report your revenues, expense, fund balance, or net position for a specific time period. Required supplementary information are additional required statements for GASB 34, and they include budgetary comparison schedules, your MD&A, and there was other data required in the statements prior to the issuance of GASB 34. OSI or other supplementary information, as the name implies, is additional information reporting for the AFR. And this includes combining statements for your non-major funds, schedule of intergovernmental revenues, schedule of cash receipts and disbursements for all funds for the entire year, cash reconciliation, Black Mountain software. And I know a lot of you folks use that. The cash receipts and disbursement schedule is included in the annual report, financial report package, meets that standard to report that receipts and disbursements for the entire year. Your year-end trial balance is the trial balance prepared after your year-end and closing has been done. And this is different from your monthly trial balance in that it's going to pick up all the activity for the entire year. And I mentioned it a minute ago, Black Mountain software includes an annual report package. And I would suggest if you have it available to go ahead and utilize it while preparing your AFR. So before we start getting into some of the nitty gritty of the AFR itself, a couple hints and tips here. Make sure your year-end closing process is done. Your adjusting entries have been entered and posted. And again, here you'll want your trial balance, run a trial balance before and after posting those year-end entries. And the year-end trial balance is what you're going to use to complete your AFR. And if you need assistance with the year-end closing process, there's, again, the webinar on the LGC website. And of course, we're always available to help you walk through that. And we have the checklist on our website. So I would, at this time, go ahead and open a template and print your instruction tab. This will be a good handy checklist to make sure you're not missing your any statements to prepare. I'd also suggest scheduling time to complete your AFR. We're all busy these last couple months of the year, and you schedule that time and get it done, and hopefully you won't miss any of your deadlines. You want to determine your major funds at this time as well. Black Mountain software has a major fund calculator included with their package, and then we also have one on our website, and I am going to talk about that in a moment here. And these, just a heads up too, that your major funds may change from year to year depending upon activity. Another thing you'll want to have handy just before you start getting into your AFR is make sure you have a copy of your prior year audit or prior year AFR available. You're going to use these for your beginning balances and some statements. And if you've had an audit done, you'll want to use your audited numbers for your beginning balances. And the final thing here, or another thing you'll want to collect and have available is your PERS notes from the Amparo website for both GASB 68 and your notes and all related information. So I'm just going to briefly mention a couple more schedules here that if you have not completed these before you, during your year-end close, you'll want to get them completed before you start your AFR. And that includes your depreciation schedule, the schedule for compensated absences payable, what we call the GK, or the accounting for your governmental fund capital assets, the gilt bag, or accounting for your governmental funds long-term obligations. And Tammy's gonna go into these reports in a little more detail. So I'm not gonna spend any more time on them here. This is a sample of the major fund calculator on our website. The general fund is always a major fund when you're reporting in your statements. And this will calculate your major funds based on the 5% and 10% rules. If you're to be considered a major fund, total assets, liabilities, revenues, or expenditures of an individual governmental or enterprise fund need to be at least 10% of the corresponding total of all funds of that category. And the assets, liabilities, revenues, or expenditures of individual governmental or enterprise funds are at least 5% of the total of for all governmental and enterprise funds. You can see this is kind of broke down into two sections, or almost three sections here. It allows for input for your governmental funds, special revenue, debt service, capital projects, and it automatically will do the calculation for the 10% and 5% as you move to the right of the spreadsheet. You're gonna, again, put your enterprise fund amounts in as well, and it calculates the total of the 10% for those, and then again for the 5% of the totals. If you use our calculator here, just make sure you're going to read the instructions carefully as well, because there are some items that are included and some items that are excluded here. So now we're ready to start looking into the AFR and Excel template on our website. If you have the chance, I would suggest and are able to go ahead and open that template and follow through with us on some of these spreadsheets. We are referencing some specific pages and rows and cell numbers. I would love to be able to show you, but I am technologically challenged on occasion, and this will probably be one of them. And I just don't want to lose going through the presentation itself here. So I would, again, have your instruction page handy, because this is going to follow the logical process for completing these, the components listed here. Very first step is going to be to go ahead and open that Excel template and save a copy of it. Save it often while you're working on it. It's a big spreadsheet, and you're going to put a little bit of time into it. You don't want to lose anything here. So one of the first things you want to do is update your entity information on the cover page. This is including your name, address, and entity number. Then we're going to go ahead and update some fund names and numbers and headers in some of the statements. There's some detailed instructions on updating header information in the instruction tab. And you'll want to get this done either as you go through or do it now. So your statements are reporting for the correct entity and the correct fiscal year. If you know which funds you don't report, go ahead and hide the tabs that you're not going to be updating. It will make it a little easier and not seem as overwhelming. And then just another big hint here, these our template auto feeds between statements and cells are linked back and forth, so you want to be careful as you're doing your entry. And also there's some little red triangles in corners of cells offering some information and hints and tips as to where some of the numbers should come from. So the first page you want to update is going to be your governmental funds, or we're going to start with governmental funds. And this is going to include balance sheets, operating statements, and budget to actual statements for your general fund, your major governmental funds, and your non-major special revenue funds. So on the balance sheet, page 15, you want to go ahead and update your major fund names and numbers using the formats indicated. And then using your year-end trial balance, you're going to enter your general fund and major fund information. The other governmental fund column, is going to auto feed when you start updating pages 63 to 76. And then when you get down to the fund balance section, you'll enter the amount for the various categories of how you designate fund balance, and your unassigned fund balance is going to automatically calculate. At this point too, I'd like to give a hint as well as in that you may want to complete one fund at a time and make sure it's in balance. That way you're not having to go searching through, a couple hundred transactions. Maybe it'll be only 100 transactions if there's an error. There is a reconciliation line row here, number 74. And then as we complete the operating statement, which I'll talk about next on page 16, those are going to end up, they should all end up at 0 in that balance check page. And then at the bottom of this governmental fund balance sheet is a little reconciliation section. And this is going to update as you complete the government-wide statements, the balance sheet conversion, and the OP conversion. And this is, you'll want to check to make sure that the amount in cell M92 is equaling, it's a net position of your governmental activities. And that's going to equal, again, the net position of governmental funds in those statements, the government-wide, the BS conversion, and OP conversion. And this is a little technique called cross-footing or balancing. I tend to use the term cross-footing, and that's just basically checking these balances back and forth to make sure they're equal, or using that balance check row to make sure that everything's balanced. So now we're ready to move on to your operating statement for governmental funds, which is page 16 in our template. The major fund names and numbers should auto feed from your balance sheet if you fill them in. And then here you're going to start on actually doing pages 48 to 53 for your general fund. And this is basically the budget to actual statement. And those amounts from 48 to 53 are going to auto feed into the general fund column on page 16. And then at that point, again, make sure that you're balancing to your balance sheet. And then if you're ready, go ahead and move on to pages 54 to 59, your major fund statements. And then you'll use these pages to update the major fund columns in the operating statement here on page 16. The other governmental funds column, again, is going to update from information when you complete your pages 63 to 79. And then the check, the last thing you want to do once you've got this operating statement completed is you're going to check the fund balances in row 57 of this operating statement and cross-foot them to row 72 on the balance sheet, which is page 15. Those fund balance amounts should equal each other. And then you want to double check the balance check row 74 of the balance sheet to make sure that's 0. So once you've got those 2 pages done, we move on to the governmental fund reconciliation, which is page 17. And this is a statement that's going to reconcile your governmental fund operating statement to the government-wide statement of activities, which is page 14. Some of the amounts here feed from the OP conversion and the operating statements. So you may need to come back to this as you go through and complete some items. And some of the amounts in the statement are also entered manually. This reconciliation is going to account for changes in how your capital outlay and depreciation expense are reported, how the gain or loss on the sale or disposal of a capital asset is recognized, how reporting revenues that do not provide current resources are reported, how the repayment of your debt principal is recognized, how the internal service funds are reported, and how changes in your accrued absences and pension and OPEB expense are reported as well. The change in net position in cell C57 on this statement should equal the change in net position on your government-wide statement of activities. And then there's also a balance check figure in cell C59, and you want to make sure that's 0. And then because a lot of this information feeds from your OP conversion and BS conversion, you may want to complete those and then go back and check this to make sure you're everything's in reconciling and balancing and cross-footing. So then we're going to look at, once we get those couple statements done, you want to look at your other governmental funds. This is going to be the combining statements for your non-major special revenues funds, the non-major debt service funds, non-major capital projects funds, and permanent funds. And if you don't have to report all those, go ahead and hide those tabs. These worksheets also probably have some columns in there that if you don't fill them out, go ahead and hide them. Creates a lot of extra pages in your PDF version when you submit it, and just takes up a lot of space, and it can make it seem overwhelming too when you're trying to complete this. So you're going to fill in pages 63 to 78 in the Excel template to using your year-end trial balance. And those pages include both a combining balance sheet and combining operating statement for each type of funds. The operating statements are in 2 separate worksheets and 2 sections, basically, one for your revenues and one for your expenditures. And then once you've got these completed, you're going to go ahead and go back to your balance sheet, which is page 15, and make sure that balance check in that other governmental funds column is down to 0. So before we move on to the enterprise and non-major enterprise funds, some folks will stop here once they've got their governmental funds completed and go ahead and do their OP conversion, balance sheet conversion, and revenue analysis worksheets. It's up to you, whatever you're most comfortable with in doing that. And Tammy, again, is going to talk about those conversion sheets in a few moments here. So now we're going to move on to your enterprise and non-major enterprise and internal service funds. These are pages 18 to 20 of the AFR and Excel template. They include a statement of net position, a statement of revenue expense and change in net position, and a statement of cash flows. So we're going to go ahead and from your year-end trial balance, you're going to enter amounts into these pages 18 and 19 manually. The column for your non-major enterprise and internal service funds will auto feed from pages 79 to 84 as you complete those. Again, hide the tabs if you're not going to use them, or if you do use them, make sure you've updated the headers. And then once you've got that in and entered, and after we finish going through page 19, or after you finish page 19, you'll want to use the balance check figures at the bottom of the statement of net position, page 18, to ensure that you're cross-footing to the operating statement, which is 19. So then the amounts that you entered and reported on page 19 with the statement of revenue, expense, and change in net position are used to enter manually amounts into your government-wide statement of activities. And then once you've got those entered, don't forget to go back and review the balance check amounts to the government-wide statement of net position. So the statement of cash flows, which is page 20 in the AFR Excel template, this is going to reconcile your the change in cash and cash equivalents from one year to the next. You're going to update your amount of cash and cash equivalents from the prior year And if you had an audit, these should be your audited numbers. And if you don't have an audit, you'll want to use your prior year AFR. Some of the amounts in this statement are going to auto feed in from various other statements, and some of the amounts are manually input. You'll want to not forget to adjust the cash flow from operating activities section, which is basically the top section of the statement here. You want to adjust those for your changes in accounts receivable, your changes in accounts payable, your changes in compensated absences, OPEB, I believe, and pension expense also fall into this. And then once you've entered all these and got down to the section about the middle of the statement there, you want to make sure that those cash and cash equivalent amounts at year end balance or cross-foot to the cash and cash equivalents on the statement of net position, which is page 18. And this is, again, where your beginning balances are going to come in from your prior year statements. So the last area I want to talk about before I turn this over to Tammy is the AFR pages 21 and 22, which are related to the fiduciary funds. This includes a statement of fiduciary net position and a statement of changes in fiduciary net position. And this is reporting the trust and agency funds that an entity accounts for that you've received, and you're acting as a trustee or agent for outside sources or whoever it may be. You're going to report here in these two statements your pension trust funds, your investment trust funds, your private purpose trust funds, and your agency funds. And again, there's a balance check line at the bottom of the statement of fiduciary net position, and those should be zeros to make sure that you've entered things correctly. So now I'm going to let Tammy have her turn in talking to you folks. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right. Did I have I'm sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. That was a lot of information. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the conversion work. So the conversion worksheets, why do we do them? The conversion worksheets are linked to the government-wide statements which is the net position and the statement of activities. And as Carrie talked about earlier, if your conversion worksheets aren't complete or balanced out, your government-wide statements are not going to balance out either. So it's extremely important to go through and make sure that everything is accurate on your conversion worksheets so that it flows correctly through to your government-wide statements. In the fund level financial statements, we account for our activity in governmental funds differently than we do our business type funds. Governmental funds use the modified accrual basis of accounting, where we don't recognize capital assets, long-term obligations, or the related deferred inflows and outflows of resources. Instead, in the governmental funds, they're recorded sometimes using those funds 9,000 and 9,500 to track that activity. And we recognize revenues when they're available. Whereas in our business type funds, we use full accrual basis of accounting and we recognize those revenues when they're earned. So in order to present our consolidated overall financial position, we need to convert the governmental funds to the full accrual basis, and this, which is those government-wide statements. So these conversion worksheets are what help us do the converting of the governmental funds to the same accounting method as the business type funds, recognizing those capital assets, long-term obligations, and those related deferred inflows and outflows of resources. So we're going to go ahead and start by looking at the BS, or the balance sheet conversion worksheet. And I'm going to go through these in the order that you will find them on our template. However, you may want to complete the GCAG, the governmental assets, and the long-term, the GLITTAG, the long-term obligation worksheets, so that these amounts transfer into the BS and OP conversion auto entry areas. So the first two columns are action items, adding the prior year's ending balances for the deferred outflows and inflows of resources for pensions, and removing the current year deferred inflows of taxes and other deferred inflows, along with adding the adjustments to the current year's inflows and outflows for pensions. The next four columns are auto-filled from the GCAG and the GLITTAG for the capital assets and long-term obligations. The last three columns, again, are action items, removing any interfund receivables and payables for government funds only, and adding net position of the internal service funds applicable to governmental funds if necessary, and then finally reclassifying short-term portions of the long-term liabilities. We're going to go through each of these action items in detail, since those are the ones we want to focus on, because those are going to need your attention and input.
Hi, Tammy.
Yes.
The slides aren't advancing.
They're not? Oh. They are on my sheet. Let's see. Which one is up on the screen now? Is it slide 26?
Slide 24.
24.
And it hasn't moved.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Must be something to do with the way I'm presenting. Screen.
Okay, you're on 26 now.
Okay, it must just have been a glitch from when I was trying to share my screen. Okay, let's
Yeah,
see.
and it looks like your video is not working either.
Oh. Let's see. Let me know if the slide advances.
Okay. Yep, that looks good.
Okay. All right. Thank you for letting me know. So those first two columns on the BS conversion worksheet that require input are columns D and E on the actual worksheet. On this slide, we'll see the deferred outflows of resources below the total assets section, and read the headings of the action columns very carefully as you're doing the input to make sure you're putting in the proper information. The GASB 68 worksheet provides the detailed instructions on where to input the amounts on the conversion worksheets for the adjustments to the deferred outflows and inflows for the pensions. It's the Governmental Fund Adjustments tab, which is included in your handout for you to reference to as needed. You will also need last year's worksheet to refer to for column D to input the prior year's ending balances. On this slide, we see the deferred inflows of resources below the total liability section. Depending on whether your deferred inflows or outflows are increasing or decreasing, depends on whether the amounts will be negative or positive. Add the adjustment amount for this year's deferred inflows and outflows of resources from the GASB 68 worksheet. And again, the GASB 68 worksheet provides those detailed instructions on where to input the amounts from that conversion on the conversion worksheet shown here. In column E, we need to remove the deferred inflow of tax revenue. Make sure it's negative, and the same amount brought in from the governmental fund balance sheet unless you have special assessments that are unbilled. So column F is will autofill from the GCAG and the GLITAG information. And I recommend that you complete these first, like I said, so that this information flows in and it populates when you're working with these BS and OP conversion worksheets. And we'll discuss these after the next couple slides. Columns F and G will fill in the compensated absences, OPEB, and pension liabilities from the GLITAG, and columns H and I will fill in the capital assets from the accumulated depreciation from the GCAG. Column J is our next action item column that we're going to talk about. This is where you will remove the due to, advances to, other funds in the asset section, or the due from or advances from other funds in the liability section. Only between governmental funds, remember. So most entities do not deal with the internal service funds with a portion that is applicable to governmental funds. Column K adds the balance sheet information of internal service funds applicable to governmental funds. And due to time, we're not going to talk about this today, but if you do need more information on how to do these two, we can go through that with you. Just give us a call and we'll be happy to help you through it. And then column L is reclassifying those short-term portions of those long-term liabilities. The BS conversion worksheet total fund balance should balance to the financial statements. All right. Next, we're going to move on to the OP conversion worksheet. And this is a complete look at the OP conversion worksheet. The first column is an autofill column, bringing in the current year deferred inflow of tax revenue. The next three columns are action items, and we'll go through those individually. But these three columns are entering prior year deferred inflow of tax revenue as a negative, adding the on behalf GASB 68 payment as intergovernmental revenue, and deleting the pension expense by major, and delegating the pension expense by major purpose, and then removing long-term debt from other financing sources as a negative number. The fifth column is autofilled and removes the principal debt payments. The sixth column is another action item, removing any capital outlays, so you will have to input information as needed. The seventh and eighth columns are also autofilled, bringing in the capital assets and recording the depreciation expense from the GCAG. The last five columns are all action items and include inputting adjustments for any gain or loss on the sale of capital assets, recording current year compensated absences, removing any proceeds from the sale of assets from other financing sources, adding any net adjustments as needed that need to be made to your capital assets, and then finally adding the change in the net position of those internal service funds applicable to government activities if you do have them. And now we'll go through those one by one and talk about them, the action items. So under the revenue section, column D is an auto column and the information will populate from the BS conversion. But column E and F are action item columns. Column E is where you will need to refer to your prior year's report and input the deferred inflow of tax revenue amount from cell D11 on your prior year's report. And make sure to keep it as a negative amount. Add any assessments to miscellaneous in row 16. Column F, you will need to add the GASB 68 on behalf payment in the intergovernmental revenues line, which is row 13, following the instructions on the GASB 68 worksheet. Oops. Under the expenditure section, column F, you will also add the GASB from the GASB 68 worksheet, the breakout by major purpose, the pension expense. Again, the instruction tab on the GASB 68 worksheet will help you determine which amounts to input in which cells on this conversion worksheet. So column I, removing all of the capital outlays, make sure to enter this as a negative, if it applies. In column L, as needed, enter any adjustments for capital assets under the revenue section. Column M is to record the current year compensated absences. Most recorded under general government, but you can also break it out by major purpose if needed. Make sure to enter it as a negative or positive appropriately if your total is increasing or decreasing from last year. Remember, to increase a liability, it is credited, and to decrease the liability, it needs to be debited. If you are unsure, check the adjusted amount for the entity-wide statement column, which is on the very end, to see if the balance is what you anticipated and if it matches the GLTAG. In column N, remove any proceeds that you may have from the sale of assets under the other financing sources section. Column O is for adding any net adjustments made to the capital assets in the GCAG under the revenue section as needed. So these are only used as needed. And again, as applicable, column P is to add any net position of internal service funds applicable to governmental funds. Make sure that your OP conversion worksheet balance check comes out to 0. Because again, if not, your government-wide statements are not going to zero out either. So now we're going to move on to the revenue analysis worksheet action items. The first 9 columns on the revenue worksheet are action items. Adjusting the taxes and assessments, breaking out the licenses and permits, operating grants and contributions, capital grants and contributions, the state and federal shared revenues, charges for services, fines and forfeitures, miscellaneous revenues, and investment earnings by major function under the total brought in from the OP conversion worksheet. So that first row from the OP conversion worksheet automatically comes in, and then under those program revenues is where you're going to need to break that information out by major purpose. The last 3 columns are action items, are auto-filled items. And they're going to adjust for the gain or loss on any sale of capital assets as needed, any transfers, ins and outs, and any special extraordinary revenue items as needed. And again, we're going to go through the action items. So make sure to delegate the program revenues listed at the top, as I mentioned earlier, out to their major purposes. A lot of the time we don't see this being done, and make sure you are listing these out to the proper areas. This information will populate the program revenues in the top section of the government-wide statement of activities, which is page 14. And as applicable, insert the assessments related to public works. The fields in the bottom section of the revenue analysis worksheet that have zeros will autofill. They're formulas. Add your local option taxes and it will automatically reduce from the auto-filled property tax field. And again, make sure that your balance check comes out to 0. So now we're going to talk about filling out that governmental capital assets worksheet, the GCAG, which is associated if you use it with Fund 9000. It's where we record all of the capital asset information in those governmental funds. You want to have your depreciation schedules up to date for year end and all entries made before you start working on the GCAG. Make sure that you enter the beginning balances. They should match your previous year's AFR ending balances or your audit if you have an audit and there were any adjustments made to your capital assets. You're going to want to use the audited amount. And first make sure, and then add any capital asset additions and or subtractions if you retire any assets in any category as appropriate. And then add your current year depreciation amounts for each asset category. And you can use the adjustments column for any updates needed. If you have any adjustments from prior year that you need to record, you can use that adjustments column. Verify that your ending balances match your depreciation schedules, making sure that debits and credits are entered correctly. And does the addition of capital assets recorded on the GCAG equal the capital outlays on the OP conversion? Just some questions to ask as you're completing the schedule. Have you adjusted for the disposal or trade-in of a capital asset? What was the carrying value? If other than 0, an adjustment on the OP conversion is necessary. Onto the GLTAG, or the long-term obligation spreadsheet for the governmental funds. And again, you'll want to have your GASB 68 worksheet done and all of your adjusting entries made for all your comp abs and your OPEB and any of your debt service, because all of this information needs to be made in your statements, on your financial statements, in order for this to balance out correctly. And again, first make sure that you're putting in the correct beginning balances, either from your audit or if you don't have an audit, your previous year's AFR ending balance. Those need to match in order for this to balance out correctly. Enter adjustments made for your long-term obligations. Amounts should match what was entered in your system software, as I stated. Verify your ending balances to make sure the debits and credits have been entered accurately. Once again, if you're increasing a liability, it's going to be a credit entry. If you're decreasing a liability, it's going to be a debit. And depending on if your pension, you want to verify that what's in your system and your entries that you enter on here are balancing out. Some questions to ask when you're filling out the GLTAG is, does the addition of your long-term obligations assets equal the proceeds from the debt on the OP conversion? Does the principal payments on debt reported on the OP conversion equal the reduction in the long-term obligations on the GLTAG? And is the amount reported in the governmental fund level statements for principal payments correct? Were entries made correctly for OPEB and your net pension liability? Your deferred outflows and inflows beginning balances, were they entered on the BS conversion? and your current year adjustments to your deferred outflows and inflows, were those recorded? So just some things to look at when you're completing this worksheet. Some things to check when you're trying to balance out your report. Once you have all your conversion worksheets done and all of your information entered that Carrie talked about earlier, there's just here's a few little things just to check to see if they're completed that will help you balance. And these checklist items on the slide for governmental funds and then on the next slide for the enterprise funds will help you balance and make sure that the balance checks are 0. There's some for the enterprise funds and then some for the cash flow statement. So now we're getting ready to completing the AFR. Once you've verified your statements are balanced and cross-foot correctly, work on the notes to the financial statements. There are samples for notes in our template, and those applicable to your entries should be completed. These can also be used as a guideline if you want to present the notes in a different format. These are strictly for you to make as your own for your particular entity. Work on the MD&A, the general statistics, that letter of transmittal, and the elected officials page. And do a quick review of the filing fee form to ensure that all of your revenues are properly calculated, and note if there is a filing fee due or audit needs to be done. And we have some hints and some tips for the Excel template. Save it often. You're putting a lot of information and a lot of time into this document, and you do not want to lose it. Keep all of your supporting documents in a safe place for easy reference. If you are using our Excel template, go through and hide the columns and tabs you're not using. It may not seem as overwhelming if you can reduce the report to only the tabs that you need. And not only just the tabs, but also the columns. If you don't have internal service funds, you can hide those columns. If you're only using a few of the enterprise funds, you can hide the blank ones that you don't need. So, or even in your general fund tabs, go ahead and hide any of those fund columns that you don't need. It just helps shorten up your document and not make it look as in-depth as if it doesn't need to. Use the instructions as a checklist so you don't miss completing any statements. If you're using the Excel template again, use the check figures and the balance check tab at the end to make sure your statements are in balance and that they cross-foot. That's a good way to go and find out possibly where at least which tab or statement your errors might be in. Make sure to edit the headings on the statements to reflect your entity. A lot of times we see that just blank when people are moving through those other supplementary information, those non-major fund statements. A lot of times there's no heading on there, so they do know what entity they're looking at, but it's not stated at the top of the statement. Hide the notes tabs that you don't need to prevent blank pages from being in your document and confusing the readers. They may think you just didn't complete the note, that it is needed, but you didn't fill it out if it's not removed. And then make sure you have all the required statements which could delay our acceptance of your report and possibly result in late fees. So do a double check, make sure everything's included that is required. And call for assistance if you need help. If it's not balancing out and you need a fresh set of eyes to maybe take a look, let us know. We'll be happy to help to take a look and see if we can find out why your report's not balancing. So the filing fee form is required in the submission of the AFR, and it determines whether or not you owe a fee, and if you have revenues over $750,000, and you need to have an audit. The form is included in the AFR in Excel template and auto completes the operating revenues. You may need to manually add any miscellaneous special or extraordinary revenues So again, review that filing fee form to make sure that it's what you anticipate for your overall revenues. Use only the revenue amounts listed, if any, in the other financing sources section. Do not use the net total. This might include expenses, and the filing fee form is for reporting only revenues and should not include any of those expenses in the other financing sources section. List all categories of revenue. And we do have a standalone version on our website if needed. If you're producing your AFR from your software reports and you're not using the template, we do have the standalone version available. And we're going to talk about the DLL, or the database ledger load. This is also required, same as the filing fee form. And it is used to upload your statement information to the Governor's Transparency website in our searchable database on our website. It is embedded in the AFR in the Excel template. So if you're submitting your AFR with our template and you've PDF'd it, if you send us the Excel version, that will satisfy your database ledger load requirement. There is a standalone version on the website that you can also fill out if you use a format other than our Excel template. And Black Mountain Software also has a CVS format available, so we accept that version as well. The easiest and preferred way to submit your annual financial report is through the portal. And note, you can only submit once. So make sure to submit all the documents you need when you submit. If you need to update or change something, you'll need to contact one of us to switch it out. We have to be able to monitor who's submitting documents on your behalf. So if you need to be registered in order to submit through the portal, and that way we know that you're a valid employee of your entity to be submitting documents on their behalf. And we have to also control the version of what we have reviewed. That's why we don't allow you to resubmit. If we do a review and then you go in after we do the review and change the information, then our review is no longer accurate. So that's the reason that if you do have to switch something out or update something, just contact us and we'll be happy to switch it out for you. If using our template, you again need to submit both the Excel version and the PDF version. And if you need assistance converting to the PDF, give us a call and we can walk you through the steps. When you're converting the Excel workbook to PDF, do a print preview of the entire workbook to ensure that the statements don't have any unnecessary page breaks and there's no blank pages that you don't need in your, and make sure that you're not including those conversion worksheets, and do a save as Adobe PDF to convert. Hidden tabs will not convert into the PDF. So make sure you have all the tabs hidden that you need to before you start the PDF conversion. And once again, we can't say this enough, make sure that if you're not using our template, that you are submitting your filing fee form and your database ledger load with your submission. And finally, we do a review of your submission for accuracy and consistency. We verify all required statements are received and cross-fit them appropriately. Beginning balances for the fiscal year are verified with the audit if available or the prior year's AFR. Revenues are checked for accuracy on the filing fee form, and we ensure that the DLL is in balance. So that concludes my portion, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Darla. Let me stop presenting. I need to do.
Are you seeing my screen right now?
No, because I need to
very
stop
cute.
sharing. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the little button to stop sharing. It was there just a second ago. Do you want to? Okay, let's see. Wonder why it's not coming up again. Hit escape. I apologize.
Did it slide up off the top of the screen?
It might.
Darla, you should be able to share your screen now.
Screen. Okay.
Is it sharing now, my screen? The PowerPoint presentation's up?
Yes, you are on slide 50.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. We're going to talk about something kind of positive now, I guess. The AFR was a tough presentation to write. We learned a lot through this presentation trying to write it. So I know in the future there will be improvements on how we try to train on that. But I get to talk about something positive, and that's the small government framework. Back in 2019, the legislature passed Senate Bill 2, and they had a lot of urging from MACO and the League for simplified reporting. So we did come up with a format. It took a lot of work to come up with this format, but it is applicable beginning for reporting periods fiscal year 2020 reporting. It allowed an amendment to MCA and administrative rules. I have those up on the screen if you want to refer to them and get more information about the small government framework. Otherwise, we have a lot of information out on our website. It is available to people with a population of less than 5,000. And one stipulation is that you have to have no requirements to report using full GAAP. We'll cover those in just a few minutes on what those requirements could be. But the small government financial reporting framework is what's known as kind of, you'll hear something such as regulatory basis of reporting. And what it is, it's modified GAAP. It's not full GAAP. It's not no GAAP. It's just kind of modified GAAP. Some of the benefits include simplified financial reporting. Actually, one of the positives is you will not have to produce the government-wide statement. So in turn, we do have additional requirements because you're not producing the government-wide statements. But also, there's things that you won't have to report, such as your pension liability and OPEB liability won't have to be reported in your financial statements. And another positive is less notes. There's fewer notes. So if you go to the Local Government Services website, what you'll see is if you go under annual financial reports, I don't know how many people have been out there yet this year, but what you're going to see is 2 AFRs. And unless you've applied and been accepted, you'll use the first one listed, the annual financial reports for counties, cities, and towns. Once you've applied and you've been accepted, you'll use the small government financial reporting AFR template. They're basically the same template. We just took out some of the schedules. But I encourage you, if you're considering applying, go out there and look at the AFR template. We do have additional information on our website, and if you on the website off to the right side, there'll be a link for the small government financial reporting framework. And off to the right side of this slide, what you're going to see is all the information that's provided. The first thing is the application, and then there's a link to get to the AFR. There's a standard audit contract amendment. And then the small government financial reporting framework auditor's report, because the benefit of this is your auditor is going to audit you on the same framework that you're reporting on. So the auditor isn't going to have to come in and produce, let's say, your pension liability statements. They won't have to do that. That won't be a part of your audit. So who is it available to? It's to those cities, towns, and counties with a population of less than 5,000. And this is based on the last US Census. Right now we're using the 2010 census. When the 2020 census is available, then we'll switch to that census. Here's the key though, entities with no other requirement in law or regulation or contract requiring you to report in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. This is also available to special purpose districts. So if you're helping out some special purpose district, they can already report on a cash basis, but their audit will then be based on the small government framework. So it'd be a benefit to them as well. So who is this not available to? If you participate in the DNRC sewer or wastewater SRF state revolving fund, you're probably not going to be eligible and you probably won't be able to apply for this framework. I would encourage you to contact SRF and ask about that. If you're a participant in the TCEP grant program or one of the other Department of Commerce programs, contact Department of Commerce. If you're in the process of a grant or maybe a large project, contact DNRC, SRF, Department of Commerce. And another thing is any other bondholders or loan agreements that you have, check those documents to make sure that they say that you do not have to report requiring a full GAAP financial statement. And this also isn't available to the school districts or special education cooperatives. So what does the application process look like? Fortunately, it really isn't that tough of an application, but what I want you to do before you apply is do your due diligence and check with any granting or lending agencies, just to make sure that you don't have to report requiring full GAAP. So that would include any lending agencies as well. We do want you to get the signature from a member of the governing body. For most of you, that would be your mayor, because we want to know that they understand that you're applying for a different framework of financial reporting. And they need to know, some of the ins and outs of what the benefit is, but then again, some of, why you may not want to apply. It's a plan that we do not want you switching back and forth from. We can't. When the legislature met, that was one of their concerns, is consistency in reporting. So if you apply and you're accepted, we would want you to continue on this framework unless something happened. And if something major happened, yes, then you would reapply, put in another application and apply to go back to full GAAP financial reporting. One thing to consider right now, if you have an audit contract, let's say you're going to apply, you've been accepted, and you already have an audit contract signed for fiscal year 2020, it's important that you contact your auditor to inform them that you're switching to the small government financial reporting framework, and also that you want to sign a standard audit contract amendment. So you would sign it, your local government would sign it, you would send that to your auditor, they would sign it, and also the third party to that is local government services. So you'd send that contract to us as well. So on the next slide, this is the application. The application is pretty simple. You'll see off on the first page, and that would be the left side of your screen, is going to be the change of financial reporting framework. And it gives you some of the information that you can turn to and some of the regulations. And then the second page is just what's on the right side of your screen. And that's, you're going to fill out those little blue boxes, your entity, your population, the reason that you want to change to this format. And then you're going to check the box, saying that you acknowledge that you take responsibility, you've checked with any granting or lending or bond covenants that you have, and that you can apply for this format. And then below that, we want the person, whoever is signing this, we wanted their name printed, and then we want a signature on the form. And at the bottom of that, you'll see that you can send it to us through the LGS portal registration email, or you can mail it in to us as well. But that is the simple application process. Once you apply, it'll come to us, and we'll look it over, and then we'll notify you if you've been accepted. So now comes the good part. You want to know, well, why should I apply? What's the benefit to me? And we talked about it a little bit, I think, at the Clerks Institute last year in Bozeman on some of the positives. One of the biggest ones is that you don't have to produce the government-wide statements, which is doing the GASB 34 conversion. So for the governmental funds, you're not going to switch them to full accrual. What your report will start with is going to just be, the typical information that you fill out on at the beginning, the elected officials and that, and then you get right into the governmental fund balance sheet, the combining balance sheet of your major funds. And that would be one of the first financial statements that you would see. You wouldn't see the government-wide statements. The reconciliations to those government-wide statements will also be gone right now in the format. There's a reconciliation down at the bottom of page 15 that takes your assets and liabilities and ties that to the statement of net position on the government-wide position or government-wide statements. That page will be gone, and then page 17 will be gone as well. We removed all the notes that correspond to the government-wide financial statements and switching the modified accrual to full accrual. And also, you won't have to complete those GASB conversion worksheets to produce the government-wide statements. The next positive is a management's discussion and analysis, or MD&A, won't be required. Then we go down to one of the other positives is that you will not have to complete the GASB 68 worksheet to figure out your pension liability or your OPEB liability. You won't have to recognize the non-employer contributions. You won't have to add in the notes that are provided by MPARA to the notes in the annual financial report framework. One thing that you will have to do, however, though, is if you're looking in those notes from MPARA and you used one of those pages to fill out what in the full GAAP AFR is known as RSI, required supplementary information, and it was just that schedule that had your contributions and your liability. That is what you will report inside the small government financial reporting framework, AFR. So those are some of the positive things that you won't have to report. But what does it include now? We kind of talked a little bit earlier about some of what you'll see you'll start with the governmental funds balance sheet. Behind the governmental funds balance sheet and statement of activities, such as the revenues and expenses and changes in fund balance, we've added 2 new schedules. And what those are going to be, and they're going to be really similar, they're going to look a lot like what is known right now in the full GAAP AFR as the GCAG. So the statement of changes in governmental capital assets, and at the top you're going to see it says regulatory basis. And then the next schedule is going to be the statement of changes in your long-term obligations, and that'll look like the GLTAG. Some of the other stuff that's required is going to be the same. You're going to break out your major funds from your non-major funds. And the notes are, I don't know how many people have gone out and looked at the template, but the notes are decreased. There's a lot less notes that you're going to have to report. You're still going to have to do your major fund budgetary comparison information as well as the non-major fund information. Remember the schedule of intergovernmental revenues. That's an important schedule when we review your report. It helps us determine if you're going to need a single audit or not. That's the purpose of that schedule. The schedule of cash receipts and disbursements that shows the activity for the full year, and your cash reconciliation, are also important schedules. And then, of course, we do need the filing fee form to figure out if an audit is required and what your filing fee will be, and the database ledger load. So the database ledger load is also embedded in this template. So if you use the small government financial reporting AFR and Excel template, you can send that to us in the PDF version as well as the Excel, and we'll extract out the database ledger load information. So this is just an example of what those 2 new schedules are going to look like. And it looks a lot like the GCAG and the GLTAG that you produce in the full GAAP statements. So what happens if you're approved for this? Right now, if you're keeping up Fund 9500 and in your business type funds, right now you're showing pension liability and OPEB liability and related deferred outflows of resources and deferred inflows of resources. We're going to have to remove those from your accounting software. What you're going to do is just do a journal voucher adjustment, and the offsetting entry to that adjustment would be prior period adjustment. If you need assistance, just let us know. We can help you with those adjustments. Remember that liabilities have a credit balance. So if you want to decrease them, in this example on the screen, pension liability is $54,000. And so you would debit that and credit prior period adjustment to remove that, just that piece of the entry. But if you need assistance, just call one of us and we'll help you through that. So earlier I talked that your audit is going to be on the same framework, which is a positive thing. Hopefully, you know, if you have an audit contract in place right now, don't forget, if you're accepted and approved for this reporting, to go in and fill out a standard audit contract amendment and give that to your auditor. One thing that maybe will be a benefit is without the pension and the OPEB liabilities, it could reduce the cost of your audits. You know, this is a simplified version and a smaller version. So hopefully that is one positive that comes out of this. The audit's going to contain the same required schedules as the AFR template. You know, but the financial statement variances between the small government financial reporting framework and GAAP are presumed to be material. So one thing that your auditors have to give an opinion on is following generally accepted accounting principles. I don't want you to be surprised by this, because in this framework, the auditor will issue an adverse opinion, you know, that you're not following generally accepted accounting principles. So don't be alarmed by this. This is just going to be a result of following this framework. And remember to go in and amend that contract, contact your auditor the minute that you're approved to let them know that you're going to change your audit contract. But I can't point it out enough that before you apply for this, just make sure that, you know, you've checked with your granting and lending agencies. The one thing the legislature wanted to ensure is consistent and comparable financial reporting. So we won't want you flipping back and forth. You can, and we understand that it's going to happen, that you might be participating and then all of a sudden you get into a large, maybe a wastewater project. And so you have to start reporting in full GAAP. Just remember to send the application to local government services. And, you know, we will accept that and you'll go back. But if for some reason, we're not going to probably let you flip-flop back and forth from one year to the next. So if without some reason, we probably wouldn't let you go back to full GAAP reporting. So that's the small government financial reporting framework. If you have any questions about that, you know, give us a call. We can guide you through the process. We can maybe give you some hints on, you know, who to contact to see if, you know, if you meet any of those regulations that would prevent you from reporting in that framework. I know we've presented a lot of information today. Carrie and Tammy went over a lot on the AFR template. If you have any questions, remember that we're here to provide assistance, so you can call us. Right now, we're still working remotely, as you can probably kind of tell from around me that I am working, you know, from home right now. So the easiest way to contact us is through email. However, if you do call and leave a voicemail on our phone, we get a notification and we'll call you back. But, you know, thank you so much for attending this presentation. It was a tough one. It was really hard to write on covering how to produce an annual financial report. I think we've learned a lot from this. And I just want to say thank you so much for attending.
Well, I just want to thank you for the presentation.
Yes, and we'll stick around for questions. If you have questions, we'll be here to answer questions. We had a comment in the chat about some of the hints and tips that we've given throughout the presentation. So I said that we'll make up a list and then I'll distribute that on listserv. We'll get that out on some of the hints that we referred to in here that maybe aren't in the handouts, or we'll repeat the ones in the handouts as well. But, you know, there was great feedback in the chat section. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. That only helps us improve the next presentation.
Yeah, I agree. If anybody wants to ask questions, just go ahead and raise your hand or open up your mic. Agnes, did you have a question?
Agnes had some great feedback. I appreciate her giving us the feedback. And we will put that in our presentation for an AFR presentation in the future. Right now, doing it remotely like this, it's so hard to add the slides that would be going back and forth. And then I was afraid that we're going to lose, our screen sharing if we go to the AFR template. And, we kind of had discussed some of that, and we kind of were afraid that we would lose, our sharing.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands raising. Agnes, this is possibly a mistake. Okay, well, I will go ahead and close out the recording of the sessions, and I just can't thank you enough for presenting once again on such a huge amount of information. I mean, this is really incredible what you put together. And the fact, again, that everybody is so welcome to call you and ask for advice and help, and just really, really appreciate what you're doing.
We thank you for hosting.
Yeah.